Thank you all for coming tonight. It's a real pleasure to welcome you here to Peterborough Public Health. And on behalf of the Basic Income Guarantee Network of Peterborough, thank you for your time and for choosing to show up. My name is Michelle Fraser. I'm a family doctor in Peterborough, and I'm a member of the Peterborough Healthcare Providers Against Poverty group. And I'll be your moderator tonight. So as we start tonight, I'm personally mindful that we're here in Peterborough, also known as Nogojubanon, or the place at the end of the rapids. And as we talk about basic income and about economic justice and political justice, I am reminded that I am of settler heritage. I'm from the European descent, and my people arrived on this land 300 or 400 years ago. And when we arrived, this was a thriving place. This was a place of abundance. There were salmon in the waters, eels in the water, wild rice covering the lakes. There were sugar bushes. This is a place of hunting and fishing, where people didn't experience poverty and homelessness in the way that we experience it today in the society that we have created. So I'm mindful that I am on the territory of the Mississauga Anishinaabe and the Haudenosaunee people. And I hope that tonight, as we gather and as we share thoughts and ideas, we can do this in a way that moves us towards reconciliation, towards truth, and towards practical change in our society. And specifically, I do also acknowledge that the folks that used to live in this territory were forcibly removed and are now living in what are called the First Nations of Curve Lake First Nation, Scugog Island, Hiawatha, Alderville, Georgina Island, Rama, and Beausoleil. So thank you to those folks, and I hope that we can move forward in a good way. A couple of hospitality sort of logistics. You'll see over here that there's a code for the bathroom. It is 531. And those are located out in the hallway on either side of the elevators. Feel free to get up and use those at all during the presentation if you need so. There's also guest Wi-Fi available. The password is not written on there, I'm sorry. Maybe someone who knows it could write it on the whiteboard over there in case anyone would like that. If you're a tweeter, there are hashtags and ats. I don't really know what those means because I'm not a tweeter, but they're over there. If you want to let the world know what we're doing tonight, please feel free. Another housekeeping note, there's a camera back here. We'll be videotaping tonight's presentation and putting it on the Nourish Peterborough website. So if you don't want to be seen, please maybe seat yourself over here. And I do think we have checks with us tonight as well, so this area is probably more visible. If you are intrigued about what you hear tonight, I suspect many of you already are fairly well educated, that's why you came. But if you'd like to learn more, there will be information out back about the Basic Income Guarantee and about the network here in Peterborough. So please feel free to leave your email if you want to get regular updates about what's happening. And I do thank the members of the Basic Income Peterborough Network for continuing to raise awareness and understanding of basic income locally. You'll also see a link to their website at the bottom of most of the slides tonight, so if you want to write those down, you can. So the reason that we're gathered, so in April of 2017, the provincial government launched the Basic Income Pilot Project. Out of the 4,000 participants that were to be chosen in Ontario, half of them have come from Lindsay. And we saw recently in a media release from the government in April 2018 that the enrollment phase has been completed, and that indeed there are about 2,000 participants in Lindsay, which is a community of 20,000 people, as I learned earlier. So about 10% of the population of Lindsay is now enrolled in the Basic Income Pilot Project. So here in Peterborough, we have this really neat opportunity of having our nearby neighbors engaged in this really innovative pilot. And so I'm so grateful to have three speakers with us tonight to share from each of their perspectives about what this has meant in their communities. So the way that tonight is going to work is each of our panelists are going to share for about 15 minutes from their perspective what their thoughts are coming tonight. And then it will be open to the floor. There will be a microphone which will be passed around. Be thinking about your questions as you go. And if you have a question that you'd like to ask, please just raise your hand and one of the volunteers will come around and bring the microphone. So I think that's everything that I have to say to get us started. So just to briefly introduce so you know who we're going to be hearing from, we're first going to hear from Roderick Benz. He's the publisher of the Lindsay Advocate, which is a newly started online and print news magazine based in Lindsay, and it's focused on social and economic wellness of the Kawartha Lakes. I also learned tonight that he has also authored a book called Basic Income, How a Canadian Movement Can Change the World. So he's been working on this for a number of years. I'm really excited to hear what he has to share. After that, we'll have Chief John Haggerty, who's the Chief of Police of the City of Kawartha Lakes Police Service, who will be retiring soon, so he has freedom of speech. And then lastly, we'll have Dana Bauman, who is an active volunteer with social agencies in the City of Kawartha Lakes, and who is a participant in the Ontario Basic Income Pilot. So 3 very different perspectives that will be very enriching. So Roderick, I'm going to turn it over to you to begin.
Thank you, Michelle. Good evening, and thank you for the opportunity to speak for a few minutes about basic income in the context of Lindsay's pilot, but also in the larger sphere. I want to remind folks here first this evening that healthcare wasn't the only social policy that Canada adopted long ago that differentiated ourselves from our southern neighbor. In Canada, we adopted 2 of our most cherished kinds of basic income when we chose to create the Guaranteed Income Supplement for seniors and the Canada Child Benefit for families with children. While it might be hard to imagine now, the majority of Canadians used to face extreme hardship in their senior years. Fortunately, by the 1970s, a number of public policies turned that situation around dramatically. That included the old age security and the Guaranteed Income Supplement, both forms of basic income that are not based on employment. So with old age security, everyone who has lived in Canada long enough can get it when they turn 65. It provides the same amount to everyone, except for those with higher incomes. And then in that case, it's taxed back based on relative need. So for seniors who have little extra income, the GIS is added to that, what we call a refundable tax credit. Having those programs in place for seniors created a dramatically improved picture for older Canadians. Senior poverty in this country went from 30% down to 5%, proving that basic income can work. We know that seniors eat better, they've got less stress, they're more active and healthier than their slightly younger counterparts who have not yet started receiving that income. For the Canada Child Benefit, we give a generous amount of money with no strings attached to any parent with children. We don't tell them how to spend that money. We trust that the vast majority of parents know what to do with the money and know what their children need. And studies back up that this money is spent wisely. There's no behavioral control involved, despite the mythology of what poor people might do with the money. And I understand what that mythology means. I was born in Peterborough and was raised most of my life next door in Lindsay. And although I had a hard-working mother, she likely could have used a basic income at several points in her life during our upbringing. In fact, about 70% of the people in this country are working, and they're still living in poverty. They're just not earning enough to keep above that poverty line. So we need to change that, and we can do better in this most fortunate of nations. Did you know that according to research based at Princeton University, a person preoccupied with money problems exhibits a drop in cognitive function similar to a 13-point dip in IQ. So the very condition of not having enough can actually be the cause of more poverty. Or how about this glimpse of inequality? Just 5 men now own nearly 50% of the world's wealth. It's time to put a stop to this level of inequality. This basic income pilot might be contained to Lindsay, Thunder Bay, and Hamilton area, but in some ways it's also provincial, national, even international. I can tell you that I fielded calls from media reps from around the world looking to get a glimpse of what we're doing in Ontario, what we're doing right next door in Lindsay. So we're going to demonstrate the power of basic income. We owe it not just to our small towns, but to all Canadians who are watching and to all Canadians who desperately need this. How is it working? I think now Barb Monroe, who I interviewed a short time ago in Lindsay. Since her acceptance into the program, it has doubled her income to just over $1,800 a month from her former ODSP check amount. As she says, before it was a constant battle of what do I pay first and what do I let go. Sometimes I didn't have enough food, so I had to use the food bank quite often. Monroe says she can pay her rent and bills in full and on time, not paying a little here and there and getting into trouble having to catch up. This was also the first year in recent memory that she was able to buy Christmas presents for her children and grandchildren. She's very careful with the money now, she told me, and she puts any additional funds in the bank. Monroe isn't content to sit at home and do nothing either, contrary to what we think lower income people are like. She works part-time at a local grocery store and she volunteers part-time at the local Humane Society. I prefer to work, she says. For one thing, I work to get me out of the house, and it's a little bit of extra income during the week. Plus, I don't believe in taking anything for free. I feel better for working because I contribute to myself and it helps with my depression when I get out. This is the power of basic income. This is what we're fighting for. Basic income must work together, though, with many of our public services, not instead of these things. We can't have an austerity version of basic income where a check gets cut every month and see you later. We need to continue to build the social structure of this nation, so this is an important part of that, but it cannot be the only part. None of us in this province, this country, can afford for these pilots to fail. So I'm pleased to see the interest here in Peterborough. These pilots must succeed so that we can use it as a launching point to bring a basic income guarantee to all Canadians. As you go about your week, reading the newspaper or online stories, be conscious of how often you hear the word taxpayer. We've become quite accustomed now to hearing and understanding everything through the lens of the economy, haven't we? Rather than through the lens of society. Successive neoliberal governments, and that's all governments since the 1980s onward, have been effective in teaching us to use this language. It's trickled down to provincial and municipal levels. It's the dominant discourse in our newspapers. But the economy is a subset of society, not the other way around. Governments are charged with the building of a better society, not just running an economy. Canada is more. So I ask you to stop using the term taxpayer, even casually, and start using the word citizen. It's going to change the way you think about politics and about political decisions that need to be made. Let's dare to dream about the kind of nation that we want to build together. We know what we need to do to create a fair and equitable society. So the only question that remains is how do we feel about the fact that we haven't yet done so? Thank you.
Thank you so much, Roderick. That was really helpful. I love the big perspective that you can bring to this discussion. It's really helpful to set the context. So Chief John, I'll turn the table over to you.
Thank you. I also very much enjoy listening to him speak. He's eloquent and has a nice flow to his voice, and he's very knowledgeable on the subject. And I'll be quite a comparison to that. I'm going to talk to you about hope. But first I'm going to tell you a story. And some of you may have heard this story if you were able to attend in Lindsay when we spoke some months ago. And for those of you that are on Twitter, I'll give you a shameless plug of, if you find me on Twitter, you can follow me, so it's Jay Haggerty. So I like using Twitter. And one of the things that I like doing with Twitter is I like to try to open the community's eyes about some of the things that I see. And one of the things that I do every morning, Monday through Friday, is I read the incident reports for the last 24 hours. So I'm reading a report about two adult shoplifters, a male and female. And let me start, I'll back up a second. As Michelle mentioned, I'm retiring. And in my business, that means I'm fireproof. I can pretty much say what I want. But I'm going to tell you a story of my ignorance. And I may, in fact, offend some in the audience today because in my journey, I'm still ignorant. And I can only improve by learning. So I don't mean to offend any of you if I go down that path. But in this story, I read a story of two adult shoplifters, a man and a woman, that went into a grocery store and they stole butter. That was hilarious for me. So I tweeted it. I thought, I thought I've seen it all. But here people have stolen butter. And my followers were able to jump on that bandwagon fairly quickly, and they said, well, maybe they're marginalized people, and there's a number of other very smart, witty comments. And then someone chimed in and said, maybe they were hungry. And I thought, oh my God, I didn't even read the report. I just basically read what we see as just a basic sentence. So I read the report, and I found out that they were both recovering addicts who had been to a food bank to get some food for their family, their little children at home, and all that they were able to get was some bread. And they thought, there's no way that we can go home and just give them bread. They need to put something on this bread. Yeah. So who's the ass? Am I allowed to say that? I guess if it's about myself. So because social media is as it is, I confessed. And I said, here's what I found out. And I think some of the people that were chirping in, they felt bad, and I felt bad as well. And I thought, how do I make this right? Do I reach out to these individuals? Do I take them to Loblaws? But that can be even further stigmatizing. So I simply made a donation to the food source, and I kept it private. But so that for me was one of those aha moments where you think you've got it all figured out. It was 2 years ago in the summer of 2016. But I thought how desperate they were as recovering addicts. And I dwell a little bit on how addiction can occur. And I'm going to be careful with this because my story's changed a little bit. I was talking to Dane on the way over. Some of you may have been reading about how I've recently had an internal investigation and had the OPP come in, and they've charged one of my officers with stealing drug exhibits from property. The entire gambit from cocaine, heroin, prescription medication. He's being further charged with fraudulently obtaining prescription medication from pharmacies while using his position. So here's a person making $100,000 a year that has somehow gone down the path of addiction. So let me not just say that poverty and addiction are exclusively inclined or aligned, so not to offend with that. And I'm going to speak now about a couple of parables that I keep in my mind. And many of you will be familiar with this first one, and if you're not, take a look at it. But it's the Upstream, Downstream parable. So imagine being I think the most classic example is you have this community that keeps going down to the river and fishing out bodies of people. And day after day, they're going down to the river and they're fishing the bodies out of the river. And at first, they're able to manage it fine, but then there's such a volume of it. And then finally, they decided to look up the river and find out why are all of these people getting into the river. So my connection to that is, how are so many in our society trapped by poverty? How is that happening? And I know from my position, and again, not to offend, it becomes generational. And I know from speaking with Habitat for Humanity, one of their biggest problems is getting people to apply, because they have generations of people growing up never even thinking that they could ever possibly own a home. So how do we improve on that? How do we, if we can link poverty to that, how can we improve on that? And I think, and I'll speak to this as the basic income as a prime example. Is my 2-minute card here close yet? Good. We actually have someone that's going to hold up a card, which is great. The other one that if you don't know about and I'd like you to take a look at is, and this was exposed to me a number of years ago, is cathedral thinking. So let's go back, I don't know, well, if we were in Europe, we could go back 600 years or further. And someone has decided to build a cathedral. So the architect, the funder, the carpenters, the masons, everyone involved in that are never going to see the cathedral built as they begin it, because it took hundreds of years. Let's round it up, say 200 years. They're never going to see it. So how do you begin a project where you're never going to be the benefit of the results? And let me not be offensive to members of that run for political office, because I hold them in high esteem. But my cynical view of it is that sometimes you get elected, and with the very first thing that you're looking at is how to get elected again. So certainly by 3 years of a 4-year Band-Aid, you're looking at what's the next quick fixes. I would say basic income is not a quick fix. It could be, in my view, and I would love to be proven wrong, it could be a 20-year, 25-year fix or course correction. So that I think individuals, as you've heard Roderick mention, they're benefiting right away. And maybe Dana will mention she's benefiting right away. But what about her daughter and what about her grandchildren? What kind of effects will that have on them? And I think that it will have some significant effects. I believe, and I know with drugs it's a big thing, and I've not really put up my hand to the federal government or the provincial government to give me more money for enforcing drug laws. And as we're finding out more and more as we're going to get into the decriminalization of marijuana, that we've been wasting a lot of money for a long time. And maybe even on other non-prescription medication, we're continuing to fight the wrong fight. But I would be more interested in investing in our infants and in prenatal care and making sure that we're giving them the proper supports along the way so that they can grow up, and as Roderick is talking about, without sounding offensive, but the intelligence levels, everything kicks in, right? They're just not given the same opportunities. Health benefits, drugs, education, housing, nutrition, all of those things along the way. I think basic income is part of the solution. And certainly I'm so very pleased that Lindsay has been selected as one of the sites. Probably some of you would think he's going to talk about crime. I didn't talk about crime at all, did I? I talked about hope. And I think that we need as a society to be able to have our fellow citizens live in an environment of hope. And if things like crime and healthcare and all of those our costs of those diminish, that's fine. But as fellow citizens, we need to get back into a place where we're properly supporting each other. Thank you.
Thank you, Chief John. That was really neat to hear you speaking about all of those, the income, the education, the prenatal care. From a healthcare provider perspective, we call those the social determinants of health. And we know that the social determinants of health are way more important than medicines and investigations in a hospital. So that resonated very much. Thank you. And then Dana, we'd love to hear from you as the perspective of someone who has been selected to participate in this pilot. What has this meant in your life?
Hi, my name is Dana Bowman, and I come onto the pilot from, coming from ODSP. And even getting onto ODSP has been a journey, because I actually start off, and it's not to correct Chief Haggerty, because I love everything that he says. It wasn't a generational thing to get there for myself. It was situational, because I'm a child of a widowed father at 31. He was 31 with 3 kids, and he's a seasonal worker. So a situation called for welfare to help us. If he knew I was even speaking of this, he would so be unhappy with me, because a lot of stigma came with that. Make sure you don't do this. Make sure a lot of stigma came with, and shame. Right away, shame with how we had to eat. So this shame was always there. And then I become an unwed mother. So that put me into a different system that was in place at the time. I'm not having a dad who made his own choices, and I have no fault in that, made his own choices for no child support. So again, until I can get good child care and working, I'm now in a situation where I need help paying my child care and my rent. So through these things, I didn't have good employment. I didn't have conversations about owning homes, saving money. Those things were not part of my conversations. But keeping a good front and not talking about our business. Don't let anybody know. And that was so ingrained. So when it came hard to ask for help at times, And there would be times that mental health did creep in. You're darn right it did. I'd get sick and I'm wondering how I'm going to pay or who's going to pay for the extra childcare for a sick child that can't go to childcare, daycare. So there was layers of things that were happening there. So it ended up that now I'm diagnosed with all kinds of illnesses, kept me out of work. And then you're a slip and fall away from being on disability. It came with different things. There's mental health, of course. It's just, you're worried, how are you going to pay those bills? How are you going to eat? I went to and I appreciate food banks. I remember I left on province for a while, came back. Because I come back home so I could eat, so I could grow food. I knew I could grow food here. It's a little more difficult in Edmonton, absolutely, for that stuff. But I knew I could grow food here. And so my first few years here, with being on no disability, we were doing okay. We still kept it quiet, but we were still doing okay. And then, I don't know what happened, but things have definitely changed. And I wasn't having a very easy time finding part-time employment for the type of work I do. I'm a frontlines person. I'm like switchboard and I like high impact. Blackberries kind of put me out of work. So some of the technology is taking away. I worked switchboards for a young offender center. I've done lots of different work, but I've lost my jobs for health and then the layers of the stress that will come on top of it that led into the mental health. Now, I went to a food bank once, and with being in a food bank, and anybody that's had the experience of a food bank knows that everybody's got a horror story of some kind. You're allowed to have food allotted to you for 1 month, and that's whatever they give you. So I come home with a jar of pickled lemongrass and a can of palm hearts. And I'll be honest with you, to this day, I have no idea what I was supposed to do with that. But it was considered part of my food allowance. It was considered my support. I don't fault food banks, and I don't fault the people, the hearts that are intended. But because there's such a limit on what I was allowed to have, again, it put me to a place where I didn't want to go ask anymore. So you start stealing from Peter to pay for Paul and back for Paul or pay for Peter. So no more taking public transportations. Walk. You know, things like that. Volunteering to keep my skills up also meant sometimes a good healthy meal because I wasn't getting it home. Volunteering has managed to keep my sanity. So when I heard about the basic income, you better believe I wanted to have adult financial responsibility over my income. And that's the first thing it's given me. I can buy healthy food because of being in such a tough income, I can't stand to this day to look at canned vegetables. Can't do it. I have a hard time with canned vegetables. So, and I can buy what I need because buying bulk, now I'm in a different phase of my life. I have adult daughter and grandchildren. Every time she has a child, my income didn't increase, so I couldn't get them that little bit. It's mostly berries or fruit. I'm not the chocolate nana, I'm sorry guys. But I'm not. I wanted to make sure that I'm giving them healthy because I didn't want them to have to. I did not. We ate, my father wasn't home. We ate bread, we ate peanut butter. We had a store credit and we were just kids. I'm 9. So when this started, and I'm the oldest. So we had no skills. I don't know how they came. Thank goodness for mentors and people in the community that have helped me build. The pilots helped me be able to buy what I need, because if I'm buying in bulk and throwing it out, I'm throwing out my money too. And that was hard. I'm actually being able to contribute my share in a meal, because my daughter has just been put onto ODSP and been recently diagnosed with MS. So this is where she's now in a situation with 4 babies. I want to support my daughter too. And I want to have a better conversation with my own grandchildren. That yes, there is a better future. People are listening. And you don't have to feel shame about where your income is coming from. It's not shameful. I don't know how we got there. It is one of the hardest things I feel. And the pilot feels like it's given me some dignity back. It's given me some dignity back that hasn't been there for some time. I can walk into the grocery store and not have to shop out of the day olds, because that's all I've been doing for the last 10 years is the outdates and the day olds. If I want it fresh, that's where to go. I'm looking forward to my farmer's market. That was a once a month occurrence. So it gives me an opportunity to financial plan and to be able to give a little bit back to my community or be in part of a fundraiser, because they've given so much to me over this time to allow me to grow. I can't thank them enough, because they really champion for this, because they really see a better future. And to see that this is what, it's really important. I feel we need to move forward and get rid of the situations, because the plans at the time didn't work. They didn't work. And somehow we got shamed, and the conversation needs to end. And if I feel defeated, so I've seen so many positive stories coming out of this already. I could plug so many people in and get daylight from them. I'm seeing people happy in town and sharing personal stories, and I'm so excited to say, hey, I could do this. I got my grandchildren hats for Easter. I got 4 babies. 6 months ago, I couldn't have got 1. And I can't get 1 when you got 4. So it was nice. Like, it was nice to do that. And it was nice to contribute to my part in Easter, that I'm not taking away from those kids. Enough with the kids being affected in this, for sure. I want them to know that it's okay. And if she needs a little bit of help, maybe I can help her. Because when they come to visit Nana, I had to ask her to give me the snacks for them. So they could have healthy snacks at Nana's, but they didn't know I didn't have it. I don't have to do that.
Thank you so much, Dana. Your voice is so important to hear. Your personal experience is just exceptional. Thank you so much for sharing with us, for taking that risk and being so vulnerable in front of a room of strangers. I honor your courage. Thank you. And I also wanted to share another story that I heard. Carolyn was in contact with some other participants in the basic income pilot, and Lindsay. And so some people, like Dana, came off of either OW or ODSP on some other form of social assistance. Other people have been working and on low incomes. And one really neat story that Carolyn heard lately was a family who had been renting a small apartment in Lindsay. And now with the basic income, they've been able to rent a house. And the woman in the household was at home taking care of her children in the apartment. And now that they have a house, she's been able to open a home daycare, which is now yet another income stream into that family. So it's such a neat example of, like you're demonstrating, you're using your money to buy hats for your grandchildren and to buy them healthy food. This is a good use of money. You know, this other family is using this money to open a new business, to take care of children. These are not extravagant purchases. And like you spoke earlier about the mythology of how the poor spend their money. We're seeing that actually the poor spend it very responsibly. And it's actually us middle class folks who have our minds confused and have our mythologies wrong. So thank you for demonstrating that so clearly. So we do have some time now for questions. Has anyone prepared one at this point? Does anyone have one ready? You can put your hand up, and we do have this microphone available. Yeah, here.
Sure. You want me to stand up or?
You can just speak into the microphone if you're able.
Yeah,